A couple of local cops thought they would give me a not-so-friendly welcome to their town. They tied me to a lamppost right in the middle of the street, putting on a show like I was just some nobody. What they did not know was who they were really messing with, or how much trouble they would bring on themselves. But let us rewind to the start. Here is the story. My name's Michael. I am 62 years old and have been around long enough to see plenty. I just moved to this small, middle-of-nowhere town in South Carolina to start my new job as the chief of police. This is not my first time wearing the badge, but this place? It had a different feel. Everyone seemed to know each other, and they were not exactly happy to see a new face in town. It did not take long to figure out that the local cops here had their own way of doing things, not exactly by the book if you catch my drift. On my first day, before I officially reported for duty, I decided to take a walk and check things out. I wanted to see what I was dealing with. So there I was, blending in with an old hat and jacket, just another guy on the street. I wandered into a small, old cafe that looked like it had been around forever. The second I walked in, I felt a dozen eyes on me. The message was clear. You do not belong here. Two cops sat in the corner, laughing loudly. I could tell they were making fun of me, sneaking glances my way and sizing me up. They had already decided I was not worth their time. Or maybe I was someone they could mess with. Their shiny badges caught the light, but their behavior did not match their job. I ordered a coffee and acted normal, just to see how they would handle it. I did not tell them who I was yet. I was in observation mode. But as I started to leave with my coffee, one of them shouted from across the room, "Hey, old man, you lost or something? You sure do not look like you are from around here." I turned halfway, keeping my face calm. "Just passing through?" I said. They did not buy it. The taller one, with a smug grin, added, "Well, maybe keep moving. Strangers do not last long around here, if you know what I mean." I shrugged and walked out, but I could feel their eyes following me. Something told me this job was not going to be all about paperwork and meetings. The next morning I went for a run just outside of town. I wanted to clear my head and get a better sense of the place. The air was fresh and it was peaceful, at least for a little while. But halfway through my run, things started to get interesting. I heard a patrol car creeping up beside me. Sure enough, it was the same two guys from the cafe, Paul and Andrew, the not-so-dynamic duo. Paul, the tall, wiry one with blonde hair and that smirk plastered on his face, leaned out the window and yelled, "Hey, runner, you lost?" The way he said it, you would think I had wandered into some private property with a giant keep-out sign on my back. His partner, Andrew, a big, bulky guy who looked like he could lift half a car, added, "Yeah, you sure you're welcome around here?" I stayed calm, slowed my pace, and replied, "Just out for a run. Pretty sure that is still allowed, right?" Andrew gave me one of those smug grins, the kind that says, "I know something you do not." "Allowed?" "Maybe," he said. "But strangers around here don't always get the warmest welcome, especially ones who don't know the rules." Before I could even ask what rules he was talking about, both of them hopped out of the car. Paul got way too close, invading my space, and started patting down my pockets without even asking. I took a deep breath and stayed calm, though I could feel my patience thinning. They rifled through my stuff, tossing smug looks at each other like they were enjoying themselves. Paul suddenly pulled out a random piece of plastic from my pocket. Nothing important, just some scrap, and held it up like he had found gold. His eyes lit up with this twisted excitement as he sneered, "Well, well, look what we have here. This yours?" I just stared at Paul, not reacting. It was clear they had planned this little stunt ahead of time. By now, I had had enough of their so-called welcome, but I knew I needed to stay calm. They still did not know who I was, and this was not the right time to reveal it. I kept my cool, even when they each grabbed one of my arms and started dragging me toward the middle of town. No questions, no explanations, just pulling me along like I was some stray dog they had picked up off the street. They hauled me right to a big lamppost in the center of town square. People were milling around, going about their morning routines. Some stopped to watch, curious, while others did not even seem surprised, like they had seen this kind of thing before. Paul and Andrew acted like they were putting on a show, cracking jokes as if they were on stage at a comedy club. Paul gave a dramatic bow and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got ourselves a real big city troublemaker here." Andrew chimed in, playing along. "Yep, looks like he's got a few tricks up his sleeve, or maybe in his pockets," Paul added, smirking. They tied my hands around the lamppost in this over-the-top, dramatic way, making sure everyone could see. Some people pulled out their phones, recording like this was the most exciting thing they had seen all day. Others just chuckled and shook their heads. Paul was loving it, soaking up the attention. He glanced around at the growing crowd with that same smirk that made my stomach turn. Then he leaned in close, loud enough for everyone to hear, and sneered, "Looks like we have got ourselves a troublemaker. Cannot have people like you just strolling into our town." The whole thing was ridiculous, and not the funny kind of ridiculous. It was disturbing. They were so caught up in their little act, they did not even care how obvious it was that this was all staged. I had seen some low moves before, but this was on another level. I reminded myself to stay calm and let them dig their own hole. So there I was, tied to a lamppost like some kind of sideshow attraction, while Paul and Andrew strutted around like they had just caught the world's biggest criminal. They were not even trying to be subtle. They were basking in the attention. People kept filming from every angle, laughing or shaking their heads. A few looked genuinely curious, probably wondering, "What's this guy's story? Why is he tied up in the middle of town?" It did not take long for the whole scene to go beyond the town. By the next morning, clips of "the mysterious stranger tied to a pole" were blowing up online. Comments started pouring in, and the theories were wild. Some people thought I was a drifter who had stepped on the wrong toes. Others were straight up calling out the cops, asking, "Who's this guy, and why does this look like something out of an old Wild West showdown?" People wanted answers, fast. Soon, the local news caught wind of it. A few reporters even showed up, ready to dig into the story. The reporters were not letting up. They pushed through the crowd, microphones out, trying to get a quote from anyone who would talk. One of them cornered a bystander, asking, "What did this man do? Did anyone see him commit a crime?" The bystander just shrugged and mumbled, "Beats me. Looks like the cops are just messing around." Meanwhile, Paul and Andrew were still on their power trip, strutting around like they owned the town square. They cracked jokes, posed for the cameras, and made a huge scene like they were some kind of local celebrities. But if only they knew how quickly this was spiraling out of control. Watching it all unfold, I felt a spark of anticipation. They were giving me exactly what I needed, setting the stage without even realizing it. The spotlight was on them, and soon enough, the real show was going to begin. That night dragged on, feeling like it would never end. But early the next morning, my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed it was the main office, and I instantly knew why they were calling. Word had traveled up the chain, and the higher-ups were not happy. What this small town thought was a little joke had turned into a full-blown scandal. Paul and Andrew were about to get a rude awakening they would never forget. The next morning, I walked into the station calm and steady, the weight of my uniform reminding me of the responsibility I carried. This was not just another day. It was time to set things right. With my badge gleaming and my uniform sharp, I headed to the main hall. The air was thick with tension, like the quiet right before a storm. Sure enough, Paul and Andrew walked in, laughing about some inside joke, acting like they did not have a care in the world. They still had not bothered to figure out who I really was. To them, I was just some random guy they could push around. But the second they spotted me standing there, dressed as the chief of police, everything changed. Their laughter died instantly. They froze, and I watched the shock on their faces slowly turn into panic. I let the silence hang in the air, watching them squirm. Their eyes darted around, like they were looking for a way out of this mess. Finally, I broke the silence, my voice calm but firm. "We've got ourselves a situation, gentlemen," I said, locking eyes with them. "And you're both right in the middle of it." The color drained from their faces as they realized what was happening. This was not part of their little game. This was real, and they had no control over it. Paul tried to say something, stumbling over his words as he scrambled for an excuse. I raised my hand, stopping Paul before he could get another word out. "Save it, Paul," I said coldly. "I've seen enough to know exactly what's been going on here." I stepped closer, looking Paul and Andrew directly in the eyes. "So, neither of you recognized your new chief?" The room went silent. You could feel the tension, like everyone was holding their breath. It was like watching a slow-motion disaster. They could not look away. A few of the other officers exchanged wide-eyed glances, finally realizing what was happening. Paul and Andrew stood frozen, trying way too hard to look confident. But their faces gave them away. They were trapped, and they knew it. I pulled out my phone and hit play on a video from the day before. It showed their whole act, smirks, jokes, and all. I held it up so the entire room could see. "In case anyone here is confused," I said, my voice steady, "this is what happened. These two decided to have a little fun at the expense of a stranger, without even bothering to check who I was." The room stayed quiet as everyone watched. You could see the shock on their faces slowly shifting to disgust. They were realizing just how far Paul and Andrew had taken things. Paul looked like he was about to say something, maybe to explain or apologize. But instead, he surprised me. He squared his shoulders, lifted his chin, and said, "Look, this is just how things work here. It is tradition, you know? We have a little fun with the outsiders. It keeps people in line." His voice had this stubborn edge, like he still thought he could justify what they had done. I raised an eyebrow and replied, "Tradition? So, you are saying it is tradition to publicly humiliate people just because they are new in town?" Paul smirked, glancing around the room like he expected someone to back him up. "It's not hurting anyone," he said with a shrug. "Just a bit of harmless fun." I looked around too, catching the faces of the other officers. They were watching everything unfold, their expressions a mix of disbelief and unease. You could see it in their eyes. They were starting to understand how bad this really was. Paul and Andrew's so-called tradition had just hit a wall. Right there in that room, it was clear. Their little game was over. Within days, their act had blown up like wildfire. This was not just small-town gossip anymore. It was everywhere. City talk shows, state news channels. You name it, they were talking about it. Reporters camped outside the station, cameras flashing and rolling, ready to catch every single detail. The town had never seen anything like it, and honestly, neither had I. The community was furious. People who used to laugh off Paul and Andrew's antics or pretend they did not notice were now demanding action. Crowds marched outside the station carrying signs that called for justice. It was like a storm no one had seen coming, and it was not going to stop until Paul and Andrew finally faced the consequences. I called a meeting and had the whole team gather in the main hall. This was not going to be a quiet warning or a simple reminder. It was time to make a point. I looked around, meeting the eyes of each officer. I wanted everyone to understand. This was not just about Paul and Andrew anymore. "From this point on," I said, my voice firm, "any behavior that disrespects the people in this community will result in immediate termination. No warnings, no second chances." The room went silent as the team took in my words. They could tell things were about to change in a big way. Paul and Andrew stood off to the side, their faces pale. The reality had hit them. This was not a game anymore. They were not untouchable, and now everyone knew it. Without saying another word, I pulled 2 termination forms from my pocket and signed them on the spot. "Paul, Andrew, hand over your badges. Your time here is done." The room stayed silent as I handed them the papers. No clapping, no celebrating. Just a heavy, tense quiet as they removed their badges. Their faces showed they finally understood how serious this was. The message was clear. From now on, this department would treat everyone in the community with respect. There would be no more humiliating or mistreating people. Ever. After Paul and Andrew's abrupt exit, the real fallout began. The prosecutor's office stepped in, determined to uncover the full story behind the so-called traditions these two had been running. They started digging through every arrest, looking for answers. It did not take long for the prosecutor's office to uncover a ton of questionable actions by Paul and Andrew. Complaints and accusations piled up fast. People who had kept quiet for years were finally stepping forward, sharing stories about being humiliated, bullied, and worse. All because of Paul and Andrew's cruel idea of fun. It was like a dam had burst. Suddenly, the whole town was speaking out. This was not just about one incident anymore. It was about making things right for everyone Paul and Andrew had hurt. Before long, the courtroom became the focus of it all. People wanted justice, compensation, and accountability. Paul and Andrew were not just looking at losing their jobs, they were facing serious legal trouble. For the first time, the town was seeing what real accountability looked like. And it was clear the community was not going to let Paul and Andrew off the hook easily. Standing outside the station, I watched the town come together. I realized this was exactly why I had taken the job. This town was ready for a change, even if it meant shaking things up to get there. The message could not have been clearer. The days of ignoring bad behavior were over. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief. We had turned a corner, but I knew the fight for respect and justice was not over. Getting rid of Paul and Andrew was just the start. The town now understood that things were going to be different, and I was here to make sure it stayed that way.